Hey everyone, I am Dan Marchetti, and I'm making this video to demonstrate how I make time lapses on the Sony RX100. This is my process because some people have asked, so I am giving a tutorial. Now, I'm not going to specifically go into how to do time lapses per se, but simply what settings I use on the Sony RX100 and also what I do in post with those files. So I'm at a local park right now, and there's a full bright moon. There's been a full bright moon for the last couple of days, and I'm trying to get as many neat time lapses as I can going. I think I'm going to have some pretty cool stuff. But let's take a look at the settings, and I'll walk you through what I have. It's a few settings that you want to avoid like the plague. It's very important. And I probably look very creepy in this lighting. Wow. Let's take a look at the settings. So what I like to do is shoot in RAW plus JPEG mode. This gives me flexibility as well as quality. The RAW files are excellent to work with, and the JPEGs give a nice preview window when organizing the files, and also a safety net if there are any glitches. And there are some glitches that you're going to want to keep an eye out for and be very mindful of. You can drastically cut your chances of getting one of these glitches by turning off the high ISO noise reduction, well, as low as possible. If you set it to high, you're going to get some white streaks in some of your RAW files. The JPEGs will be fine for some reason, but the RAW files will have these white streaks through, and I'll show you a couple of examples I've run into with that, and also a couple of ways to fix those. Sometimes you're able to fix them, sometimes you just have to go with the JPEGs in those situations. So we'll take a look at that in post. Just know that you're going to want it as low as possible. This will dramatically reduce your chances of getting those white streaks. In fact, I have not had any white streaks at all since I've been shooting on low. With high, I get them. With low, I have not so far. Fingers crossed there. Another thing you're going to want to do is make sure long exposure noise reduction is off. Now, with continuous mode, I don't think that you're able to turn it on. I think it's disabled by default. But basically what it is if you take a photo longer than a certain time frame, then it'll take a second photo right after of a black image, and then it'll compare the two and figure out what is noise and reduce the noise from your original photo based on that black image. So since we're going to be shooting in continuous mode, that's disabled. So make sure high ISO noise reduction is set to low. Make sure that AF illuminator is off, because you're not going to be able, for like nighttime photography, really to focus using that method for something way off in the distance. So just turn it off. Steady shot, make sure it's off. We're going to be using a tripod, and if it's on, if the steady shot is on, that can actually introduce shake into the shot rather than reduce it. So those are the big important settings right there. What I will do now is line up my shot, and I want to be mindful of my surroundings and see what the best shot is going to be here. And I've been all around this park, and I've set up a few time lapses, and I think I got some pretty neat ones. We'll see how they turn out. But now I'm right here. I see the moon out there. So white balance. White balance isn't super important since we're shooting RAW plus JPEG. It really does more with the JPEG. But the RAW file, when you choose a specific setting, then it'll give you the RAW file a base to start from for processing. But you can really change it to whatever you want in post for the RAW files. So what I like to do for night photography generally is shoot using the incandescent setting. This gives a nice rich blue to the sky, and if you want something warmer, you can do that, but really it doesn't matter at this point for the RAW files. So once we have our shot lined up the way we want it, what I'll do is line it up and then pull back a little bit so that I'll have a little bit of space to crop in on the image, since the raw images are all full frame. When you frame your shot, if you frame it accordingly to that, you're gonna have to chop off either some of the top or some of the bottom, or both, to get that nice 16:9 widescreen format for high definition video. So I'll frame it up and then pull back a little bit to make sure that I have what I want in my shot, how I want it, and I can adjust that in post later. So let's say we have our shot lined up. At this point, what I'll do is switch to autofocus. I'm gonna half press the shutter, and I'm going to focus on something in the distance. And once I have that the way I want it, I'll switch to manual focus. So at this point, we're going to take a few test shots to get a nice exposure the way that we want it. So make sure it's lined up how I want it, and I'll think about how long I want to stay in a location, how fast I want the action to be taking place, and that's going to determine my shutter speed. Now, the buffer on here is pretty good about keeping up with several photos, taking one after the other, right after the other, in continuous mode. Depending on your card, the buffer may be slower. So the card that I'm using right now is a little over 2 seconds in between shots is the fastest it will go. So if I have my shutter speed anything past like 2.5 seconds, it's going to take them immediately one after the other, and the buffer's not going to have a chance to fully fill up. So I've been liking 4-second exposures for the moon tonight. I'm going to leave it at 4-second exposure and change my aperture now to, well, let's see what it looks like at f4. I'm going to put it into a 2-second self-timer, and now I'm going to focus on something in the distance and then switch to manual focus. That's going to lock in my focal distance. And now I'll take a picture. And review that image. Now this is what I have so far for this here. At this point I'm going to zoom in and make sure everything is nice in focus. That looks good to me. And moon right there looks nice. So also what I can do is press up, and that'll bring me to a histogram. That'll tell me everything that's washed out or too dark. So it's saying all this stuff is too dark. Now really, if it depends what I want to do at this point. Do I want those dark sections and areas to be brought out in the final product? Do I really need the detail in those areas? I'm thinking with a moon I'm not going to need that so much as a silhouette. So let's take a look now. So I'm happy with that as it is. I'm going to go back, half press the shutter to go back into the camera, and now I'm going to switch to continuous shooting. So now at this point I'm going to clamp down my shutter. Now the way I'll do this is I'll use a piece of plastic and a rubber band. This piece of plastic is a tab from an ink cartridge. Now when putting on this rubber band, you want to be really careful that you don't bump the zoom tab. That can quickly mess up your shot. And it's a little bit tricky, but with a little practice it's not too difficult. So I'll just position this here, and I will do one last quick test before I clamp this down. Check my 4-second shutter speed, f4.0 aperture, and ISO 125 to keep the noise down. And I think I like how that looks. So now and I'm in manual focus, and everything looks good. So I'm going to go ahead and clamp the shutter down. And I want to make sure that this shutter is clamped tight. If it's a little loose, it can come up, and if it's not quite enough pressure, it can actually stop taking photos. So make sure it's make sure it's nice and tight there. And so now here's some light. This is the tab that I use, and this is the rubber band. So this is how it's clamped down. Now I've got this rubber band going over the screen. It's not interfering with any of the buttons there. And the tab here is actually pressing the shutter. And there's a little gap here that goes right over the side of the camera, so it doesn't interfere there as well. So actually not too bad of a setup. A little clunky, but it works, you know. It is what it is, and it works. So once the shutter is pressed and I'm done fiddling with it, then what I'll do is I'll place my hand over the lens for a couple of shots, and then that will give me a cue later on the computer to know that this is where the actual time lapse starts when I'm done fiddling with it, and the camera should be perfectly steady from this point on. That'll help me quickly locate those files later in post. Also, once it's finally going and everything is as it will be for the remainder of the time lapse, I also like to set a little timer on my phone so that I'll know how long it's been going, and I can calculate based on the shutter speed how many seconds worth of time lapse in the final product I'll have based on how long I'll stay here. So that's how I set it up. That's settings that you're gonna want that I use, and this is just my process. So don't hold me to it if you use this and the results are different. I am by no means a professional photographer, but it seems to work well enough for me. And now let's go over and take a look at the files. I'll see you in post. Click here for part 2.